Hi, everybody. We're just going to give everybody a minute or two to get logged on, and then we'll get started. All right. Does that look good on your end, Matt?
Yes. Yep.
Perfect. Hi, Louise. I like looking at the names of everybody joining. All right, I think that's everybody. There's still a couple more hopping on. I'll just go through some housekeeping and introductions real quick. Welcome to today's Wednesday webcast with Knight Home Care Financial. And I'm Amy Knight, if you don't know me. I think most of you do, but I've got with me Matthew Gordon, also known as the CAP doctor. And he is going to give us a presentation today on how to avoid CAP problems in your hospice agency, how to actively monitor it and try to stay ahead of it and know that you're running into trouble before you get there all the way. And so that's what we're going to do. So a little bit of housekeeping. We're open to questions, and truly, I'm just going to make introductions. I'm going to sit back and listen with everybody else and let Matthew do his presentation. But I will be watching the question and answer panel. And so any questions, please put in that question and answer panel so that we can keep track of them as opposed to chat. If you put it in chat, I don't see it nearly as easy. Now, speaking of chat, everybody asked, can we get the slides? They are in the chat panel. So if you open up chat, first of all, if somebody will let me know other than Matt, can you see them? Because I posted them as a link as well as an actual PDF. But sometimes when I do that before the webinar, like they don't show up in chat. So if somebody will just comment, either they're there or they're not, that will let me know. But there is a slide deck available for everybody. And it is being recorded, and we will send out the recording later. It goes out tomorrow, and it will be the recording as well as the slides will be in there as well. Feel free to share with all of your friends and colleagues. We're happy to share. So I don't see anybody in chat. I do not see the slides updated. Okay, thank you. Let me just update them. Let me upload them again. Also, bear with me because Slack changed something where chat has to be like enabled, but I don't see that option. So do you guys see chat? Matt, do you see chat?
Yes, I see it.
Okay. I uploaded them again, just the PDF. Yes, but it shows disabled. Bear with me. Oh, the slides are now available. I wonder why chat is disabled. This is a new Slack, not Slack. What app is this? Zoom thing. Oh, wait a minute. It's in these three dots. Everyone. Okay. Chat should be fully enabled now. Okay. And the PDF should be good. Okay, cool. Hi, Louise. Okay, I think we're good to go now. So Matt, I'm going to turn it over to you.
Yes, thanks for having me, Amy. I'm glad to be here and have this discussion about CAP. We're just going to walk through a slide deck to start with, and then we'll take any questions you have at the end. So I've been doing this out on my own since 2016. I've been helping hospices proactively monitor and stay out of CAP trouble. And the key word there is proactive. If I can impress one thing on you during this meeting. It's always want to be proactive with looking at CAP. Okay, it's not something to ignore and just look at once a year. So if we go to slide 3, learning outcomes. Okay, upon completing this session, what are our goals here? Number 1, how do you discern your risk as a hospice for CAP trouble? We're going to talk about some easy ways and metrics you can use to figure out what your risk is. And then if you do have risk, number 2 would be understand how do you get out of that risk? What adjustments do you make to fix it? Okay, next slide. All right, 18% of hospices exceeded the CAP in 2020. That's not my number, that's MedPAC's. And that number is on the rise. When I started doing this a few years ago, that number was 11 or 12%. So this is an increasing problem in the hospice market. The second bullet there, hospices may not be notified of an overage until several years after a CAP year ends. That's a point of confusion for a lot of people, and it relates to what's called the 3-year look back period, which we'll talk about in more detail in a minute. Solutions are needed to track and manage CAP risk during the CAP year on a proactive basis. Again, that's the key right there. Knowing where you stand on CAP during the CAP year while you still have time left to make any needed adjustments. Once September 30th hits, there's nothing you can do. If you have a problem, there's no way to admit more patients or do anything to affect what your result is going to be. All right, next slide. So for this CAP year, 2023, the CAP amount per beneficiary is $32,000. Okay, that number goes up every year by 2 or 3%. This year, it's the $32,000. That's a lifetime CAP credit per patient. Okay, doesn't matter if the patient's on service for a day or a number of years. That's all your hospice and any other hospice is going to ever get in credit for that patient. All right, so that equals, in rough terms, about 6 months of reimbursement, if you do the math there. All right, so you measure CAP obviously at a patient level, but CAP is not repaid at a patient level. For example, if you have a patient that you've had on service for a year, you don't necessarily have to pay back that money, okay? CAP is only calculated in the aggregate, meaning you roll up all the patients you had on service for a year, all their beneficiary credits, measure that against all of the revenue you receive for those patients, and in aggregate, do you have a problem? Is your revenue higher than the allowable CAP you have? That's when you would have to pay back a certain amount. Okay, so you may have patients over CAP, patients under CAP, but net you want to be obviously under CAP. All right. Okay. Proportional versus streamlined. The vast majority of you guys are going to be proportional measuring CAP hospices. Okay, that means that your CAP credit is prorated across all the days of service of that patient. If it crosses over multiple CAP years, your CAP credit is also allocated across multiple CAP years. All right. If you started business after 2012, you're automatically a proportional hospice. If you started before 2012, you would have had to make a special election in 2012 to maintain your status as a streamlined hospice, which was the old way of measuring CAP. And that honestly was a lot simpler. The streamlined method, if any of you are on it, you get the full credit in the year of admission. So even if you admit a patient on September 30th, the last day of the CAP year, that full $30,000 credit goes to you in full in that CAP year. Okay, the difference between the proportional is if you admit on September 30th and you're a proportional hospice and that patient lives on for several weeks or months, you would have a very minuscule fraction of a credit because you only had 1 day of service on that initial admission year, and the vast majority of the credit would push into the next year where all the days of service were. Okay, Now, this credit is not only allocated across CAP years, but it's allocated across hospice providers. If you have patients that either have been with another provider or will be if you live discharge them eventually, and then they go on subsequently to another provider, you then split that credit with the other hospice. Again, allocated based on days of service. Okay, so that's obviously not an optimal situation, but it does happen. Okay, next slide. Self-reporting is where we are right now. Okay, between January 1st and February 28th of each year, all hospices do the self-reporting for the prior completed CAP year. And we're talking about the 2022 CAP year, which closed on September 30th, 2022. So they give you a 3-month lag to wait until you self-report to get make sure all the claims are through the system. And so you can run your PSNRs to use for the self-reporting, okay, anytime in that 2-month window, January and February. Beneficial to you to run it earlier rather than later, because as we'll talk about, CAP only gets worse over time. It's not a static number. This is a point in time measurement, and it will change. So the earlier you can run your numbers, the better the result will be. Okay, if you run your numbers and you owe money, you have an option to apply for an extended payment plan, which can run from 6 months up to 5 years. Okay. This involves applying with Palmetto, filling out an application form, and depending on the length of the term you're seeking, some additional documents. For under 11 months, it's a very simple process. You really just send them an amortization schedule showing, if you ask for 11 months, for example, you put in the amount owed, the interest rate, and then what your monthly payment would be for those 11 months. That's all you need along with the application. If you're going for a year or more, then it gets more involved. You have to provide income statements, balance sheets, and cash flow statements for the last couple of prior years, plus projected statements moving forward for the next fiscal year. So they're wanting to get a comprehensive view of your business, what your margins are, what is your capability of paying back the money, and so forth. So it's a more involved process. As I mentioned, the interest rate, it's not cheap financing. It's roughly 10% right now. So it's certainly not free money. And that means that you only want to use it if you have to, obviously. Okay, so if you do not opt for the extended repayment plan, the amount owed comes due as soon as you submit your CAP forms to Palmetto, and they will. You can either send a check in, or they will. If they don't receive a check, they will deduct it from your next monthly reimbursement. Okay. So what is this 3-year look back period? This is probably the most common question I get, people trying to understand what this all means. Why is it there? As I mentioned before, the self-reporting measurement of CAP is only a point in time. It's not a final number, okay? And as I'll explain in a minute, CAP always gets worse over time. So what it was in the self-reporting, if you had a cushion, that cushion is going to decline over the coming months and years. And it may decline to the point where it flips from a cushion to a liability where you actually owe money. All right, so the MAC or Palmetto has 3 years to come back and redetermine the CAP result. The 3-year clock actually doesn't even start until they send you your determination, your initial determination letter, which may not, for 2022, you may get that in April, you may get it in June or July. So it's actually more than 3 years from when the CAP year ends, if you're looking at it that way. All right, so why do the CAP numbers get worse over time? Okay, they get worse over time due to patients that you admitted in the initial CAP year that are still on service in subsequent years. So let's try to illustrate that with an example. You admit a patient on July 1st, 2022, okay? And that patient is on service for 6 months. Now you're up to January 1st, 2023, and you're doing your self-reporting, okay? You run the numbers. What the numbers are going to reflect is that patient's CAP credit is going to split half to 2022 and half to 2023, because you had about 90 days of them on service in 2022, which is July, August, September, and about 90 days in 23, which is October, November, December. All right, so it's going to give you 0.5 credits for 2022, which is about, roughly $15,000 of credit. All right, so that's your point in time estimate at the self-reporting. But now let's say the patient lives another 6 months before eventually passing away on July 1st, 2023. All right, now if you were to measure CAP on that later date, July 1st, 23, your credit would now be split 75% to 2023 and 25% to 2022, because now at that point you've got 9 months of service on 23 and it's still only the 3 months on 22. So just due to that passing of time, the 6 months, your 2022 CAP got worse by 0.25 credits, which is roughly $8,000. So that's the mechanism by which CAP gets worse over time. And typically you're going to have patients, especially if you're a hospice of a larger size, you're going to have a good chunk of patients that are going to live just for 1, 2, 3, or possibly more years. That's just how the numbers go. So the CAP numbers will continue to deteriorate over time as long as there are still patients on service. And it doesn't matter if they're on service with you or another hospice. If you live discharge them, they go to another hospice, your CAP will continue to get worse because that new hospice will now be taking your credit. Okay. All right. So how do I know if I'm at risk? Okay, I'm going to give you some quick things here. The main reason people get into trouble is too long of an average length of stay. Okay. A quick test I like to do is your ratio of your average census to your average monthly admissions number greater than 4 to 1. All right. Let's say you're a hospice of a census around 40. What this means is you need about, if you're a 40 hospice, you need about 10 admits a month to maintain good CAP health. All right, 10 or more. Okay, that's a 4 to 1 ratio. If your census is 40 and you're getting 6 admits a month, that implies a length of stay that is too high, and that's going to put you in CAP trouble. Okay. If your census is 40 and you're getting 20 admits a month, that means you have a fairly quick turnover of patients. You have a low average length of stay, and you're not going to have any CAP risk if that's the case with you. All right. So that's one thing. Live discharges come into play because, as I said, the more patients you live discharge, the more possibilities there are for patients to go on service somewhere else in the future. And when that happens, they drain the CAP credit that was previously granted to you. So if you're seeing over 25 or 30% of your total discharge, discharges being related to live instead of deaths, that's the kind of the threshold I look for there. Low new Medicare admission rates. Okay. You want at least 75 or 80% of your admits to be coming in on their first benefit period. All right. Why is that important? Because they come in with their full credit, their full CAP credit intact, the full 32,000. If you're getting a patient on their 6th or 7th benefit period, you're likely only going to get a very small fraction of that patient's overall CAP credit because they would have already had a significant amount of time with another hospice. All right. So that is another risk factor. Unfortunately, smaller size hospices tend to be more prone to CAP issues just because the swings in the numbers tend to be greater. The admit numbers tend to be less predictable and regular, and the referral sources are less diverse. So unfortunately, I do see that smaller size hospices overall have more risk. Not true all the time, but as a generalization, it's true. Admissions declining over time. Okay, if you're on a growth trajectory for a couple of years and then you all of a sudden your admits plateau and then tail off, that's a red flag for CAP that you're going to be probably getting into a risk area, because when those admissions tail off, the result of that is your average length of stay tends to go up the longer length of stay patients that you have on service make up a bigger chunk of your census when that happens. Okay, so those are the main risk factors. Okay, not everybody has all of them. The more you have, obviously, the more chance you'll have to have CAP trouble, but definitely the biggest one is that first one, the overall length of stay. And I recommend that 4-to-1 quick test ratio to do a quick analysis of what your risk might be.
I got a question here.
Yep.
Is there a length of stay number that you try to keep it under as opposed to this ratio? Because we calculate length of stay.
Yeah.
What number do you put on that?
Yeah, I try not to get in conversations of length of stay just because there's different way people calculate them. But in terms of the overall length of stay of the patient, as I mentioned, the credit gives you roughly 180 days of CAP credit, but since your patients won't always be on their first benefit period, you need a lower length of stay, obviously, than the 180. I usually say about 120 is kind of the threshold you want to be at or under.
Okay, and I think we got another question. Is 40 patients a smaller sized hospice, in your opinion?
40, I'd say that's getting into a mid-size. I'd say, to me, about 40 to 60, I'd call a mid-size for an independent hospice. 30 or less would be a smaller size, and 70 or more, I'd call a larger.
Okay, great.
Yep. Okay, let's move to the next slide. Okay, so people ask me, well, I'm looking at a CAP problem. What should I do here? Discharging is not a recommended solution. Okay, discharging should be a clinical decision, but if you were to discharge patients just because of their CAP implication, I'm not going to get into all the mechanics and the math, but you could end up worse off financially by discharging if the patients go on service, depending on the particular patient and if they go on service elsewhere. So it's certainly not a surefire answer to improve your CAP. You know, as a business owner, obviously you want to be growing your business, not shrinking it. So discharging, you're not going to hear that from me as a path to try to improve your CAP situation. All right, let's go to the next slide. Okay, so if you're in a CAP problem, all right, what you need to do is increase your mix of the shorter length of stay patients. All right, now I know this is easier said than done. A lot of smaller, mid-sized hospices have a lot of trouble getting these shorter length of stay patients, just getting into the proper referral sources or whatnot. So I'm not saying it's easy, but from a mechanical standpoint, it's important. Okay, why is it important? If you admit a patient, let's say they stay on service for 30 days before passing away. So you admit them, you get the full $32,000 CAP credit, but you only generate about $5,000, $6,000 of revenue for those 30 days. Okay, so that's about a $26,000 surplus that you got from that patient that you can then put in your bank, so to speak, and use against your longer length of stay patients. All right, so that is, if you're trying to right size your CAP in a short amount of time, that's really the only way to do it. Okay, if you're marginally kind of on a borderline of CAP issues, typically just bumping up your admits by 1 or 2 months may be enough to get you out of it, and you don't need to focus on the short length of stay necessarily. But if you're in a, what I would call a serious CAP problem where your liability is significant, you definitely, that is the focus you need to figure out. Okay, how do you accomplish that? Okay, analyzing your referral sources is the first step. If you have the data to look at, looking at what where are my patients coming from and what types of patients are each of those sources giving me. All right, and there's also external services out in the market that do that for not too much money. Actually, you can buy a subscription to get some data for your county on some physician data in terms of what what hospices each physician in your market refers to, even going so far as to say the average, the length of stay of their hospice referrals by physician. So you can kind of get a sense of which physicians are referring the shorter length of stay patients that you can use in your marketing efforts. Okay. So other than that, arrangements with hospitals and inpatient facilities are ways that can be used to try to bring in more of those shorter length of stay patients, which are typically going to be a lot of times those hospital-based patients that are very close to passing away. All right, if you do happen to be a streamlined hospice, the shorter length of stay is not really much of an issue, because again, you just want to get the admissions in by the 11th hour, by September 30th, because again, the rollover into the next cap year is not an issue with a streamlined. All right. Okay, cap tracking process. This illustrates kind of an example of how I look at it, how I look at cap, and the importance of looking at a full year picture of where your cap is trending. So in this example, the point in time where this report would have been generated was April. And what we're looking at is, what are the beneficiary credits I have up through that time? Okay, where's my census been running? And now what going forward through the end of the cap year, what do I think my admissions are going to be? Okay, so in this case, I'm saying, well, I'm expecting 23 admissions per month, roughly. If I do that, how does my credits roll forward? And where will I end up the year in terms of total credits, total revenue, and will that give me a cushion? And in this example, this hospice has a $1.6 million cushion at their self-reporting. You can see that in the first green number, and that's referenced by the 233.88 beneficiary credits. And then that lower number, so you can get a sense of this, that is the what I call the long-term erosion. So over that 3-year look-back period, you had 233 at the self-reporting, but over 3 years, that 233 is going to turn into 202. So for the reasons I stated before, with those long-lived patients that cross over multiple years, those drain your initial year credits over time. So while you had a $1.6 million cushion, the self-reporting, that cushion is only $600,000 after 3 years. So still good, you're still fine, but you can see that you can't just get by with a skimpy cushion at the self-reporting. You got to have enough that's going to weather that storm over the long term. And that's that's a big thing that I try to help the hospices I work with understand and make sure they're tracking to the right number. Okay, beneficiary erosion can vary widely by hospice. Proportional hospices, I've seen anywhere from 5% to 40% erosion from the year-end high point to where it goes after 3 years. So a big range there. It depends on the length of stay. It depends on if your admissions are backloaded toward the end of the cap year, heavily into August and September. Obviously, you're going to have a lot more erosion of your credits because those patients are going to bleed over more and more. Streamlined hospices, the erosion is very small. The erosion would only occur if you live discharge a patient and they go on service with another hospice. So typically 5% or less for streamlined hospices, if that's you.
I do have a question. It's a really good question.
Yep.
Does the remaining cap credit from patients that died credit the year in which they were admitted or the year in which they came off service, or how is it prorated if it's between 2 years?
Yeah, so each year is its own calculation. So taking my example in year one, let's go back to that example, if you could, to slide the 3-year look back period slide. Okay. So the patient was admitted July 1st, 2022. They passed away July 1st, 23. All right. So for 20, there's two separate calculations for that patient, one for 2022, one for 2023. So 22, 0.25 cap credits because 3 of the 12 months of their service were in 22, so 25%. So that's about $8,000 of cap credit you got for 2022, okay? Now you compare that to the actual revenue you got for that patient in 2022, which was 3 months, so 3 months of reimbursement, we'll call it $18,000, all right? So 8,000 of credit, 18,000 of reimbursement. So you're underwater by $10,000 for 2022 for that particular patient, okay? 23, you've got the 0.75 credit, we'll call it 24,000 of cap credit, and you've got 9 months of service, we'll call it $50,000 of revenue reimbursement. So you're underwater 24,000 minus 50,000, that's excuse me, 36,000 underwater.
Total, yeah.
So, excuse me.
What if it's somebody that, let's say the example is they're on service 1 month of the 22 year and just 2 months, or, you know, maybe even just 1 month of the 23 year, it's still prorated though, right?
Yes. Anytime there's a crossover, it's always prorated by days of service.
Okay, I'm gonna give you a minute to catch your breath there. And so Frank, it's so that's like 0.25. So it's a percent. So however long they were alive during each reporting period is where their cap will go into that bucket. So if they were alive, 25% of their days of service were in cap year 22, then 25% of the cap goes there, and then 75% will go to the following year. So let me know if that does not answer the question. All right, then what slide were we on?
All right, let's go to receiving cap letters. So you have the initial self-reporting, but again, if you owed money at the self-reporting, you're going to owe more money later in the 3-year look-back period, and that's the reason you get cap letters. Even if you didn't owe at the self-reporting, excuse me, I gotta catch my breath 1 second. You right?
Go ahead. You know when you swallow water just the wrong way? I think that's what happened. And just while we're doing this, I do not do this. We do not track the hospice cap and monitor it like this. And we refer all of our hospice clients over to Matt for this. So that's kind of how we work together. So just make sure when the questions come in, they're going to go straight to Matthew and not me, but I can forward them. I'll make sure his contact info is in there. Are you better?
I don't know. I'm slightly under the weather here. I'm sorry about this, but I'll try to power through here. All right. So if you're in cap trouble, the norm is for you to get multiple letters over the 3-year look-back period, typically about once per year. The timing, however, is unpredictable. I mean, you might get it in April 1 year, June another year. You just don't know when they're going to send it. Unfortunately, you have to respond very quickly. They only give you 15 days to either request a payment plan or pay what you owe. So it's a stressful time when that happens for sure, and you've got to act quickly. So another thing I do with clients is just let them know if you were to get a cap letter this month, what would be the amount you owe. So just so it's not a surprise when they get it. They're expecting it, and they'll at least have time to think through the implications. All right, so when you talk about cap liability, really it's never final. These numbers are not static, they move over time, and until all the patients you admitted in that first year are passed away, the number will continue to move. and move to the worst, I should say. So just like with the self-reporting, you can request a payment plan for these letters. You know, if you want to pay it over time, you can be on multiple payment plans. They will allow that if you have CAP issues multiple years in a row. Let's see, I think that pretty much covers CAP letters. All right, Amy, I'm looking for guidance. Any questions or anything that's come up that you think warrants more of a deep dive that we touched on or didn't touch on?
Let's see, I've got a new question that popped up. If patient was admitted in 22 and died in 23, is the CAP amount to use for the calculation? Oh, that's a good question too. The CAP amount, the $30,000 or whatever it's at now, do you use, it's probably pro rata. So if they were alive, 25% of their days were in CAP year 22, you would use the CAP amount for 22 at 25%. And then if they lived into 23, then you would use the 23 CAP amount for the portion they were on service during 23.
Yes, you have to split their $30,000 CAP amount between the years, prorated by days of service on each year.
Yeah.
Correct.
And so then the second year, you know, so the patient, just because they admitted in fiscal year CAP year 22, doesn't mean that that's the CAP amount that they are stuck with. It will grow each year. Not each year because you run out of services. But if they're admitted at the end of CAP year 22, you use the fiscal year 22 CAP amount, but then moving into 23, you get to use the 23 CAP amount.
Yeah. You're saying that because the number goes up each year,
yeah,
31,000 to 32. Yes, you use the number for that current year, so it'll change each year, even though it's the same patient. The CAP amount will update. Correct.
Okay. And then I would say one thing to really point out is you mentioned that it's self-reporting time. And so if anybody doesn't know what that is where you go download your own PSNR and you fill out their little Excel schedule and you put your numbers in it and you report to them. But when you put your numbers in it, it's going to tell you what your CAP looks like. You've got a problem or you don't. And so that is due February 28th.
Yeah, February 28th. And again, I would say just a way you could do a quick look at it. If you do that and it shows that you have a cushion of less than 10% of your total revenue, that to me is too close for comfort. It means that you have a chance of flipping to a liability over the 3-year look back period. So that's another quick test you can do to gauge your risk.
Okay.
Yep.
And then another question just popped in. Is the value-based insurance design through Medicare Advantage programs affecting the CAP? I don't think so, is it?
Yeah, I don't believe the Medicare Advantage is being counted to the CAP, at least as of now.
Right. Yeah, so that doesn't, these are straight, true, what do you call them? Traditional Medicare patients is what you're looking at.
Yep.
What other, I was trying to remember if there's anything else on that self-reported, self-determined CAP reporting.
Yeah, it's a simple form. Everybody either does it or has someone do it for them. If you don't send it in, they'll put you on revenue hold. So obviously everybody sends it in, even if, you know, but it takes literally 5 minutes to do. So it's not a big deal. You just have to, if you're a newer hospice and you don't have your PSNR access set up and you're unable to run the reports, I advise you to call Palmetto, call the provider line, and they should be able to help you out by sending you some reports that you can use for it. But I don't just ignore it and not do it, because that's only bad will come of that.
Right. And I was actually gonna, somebody in chat asked a question about a spreadsheet to use. And what I would direct you to is the actual spreadsheet that's used for the self-determined report.
Yeah, you have to use Palmetto's spreadsheet. You can't put your own thing together. So if you do it, it's on Palmetto's website. If you do a Google search for
I'm
Palmetto
posting
CAP
it right
self-reporting,
now.
it should come right up.
So I just posted the link. And so, but she was talking about to do it during the year, like to do our own self-monitoring.
Ah, that's a good question. Let's go back to my slide where I had the spreadsheet on there.
Yeah, it was a little intense.
Yeah, I know what you're saying. And this, what the person asked is very good, because the way CAP works is that if you look at it at a point in time during the year, let's say January or February, by just saying this is my credits to date and this is my revenue to date, that will give you an overly optimistic view of what your CAP really is. Okay. The best I can explain why, it's very complicated, but your credits are not only the admissions you've done in that CAP year for the first few months, but you have rollover credits from the prior year due to those late year admissions, say in August and September, that live into this current year. So you almost, it's almost, the way to look at it is you almost start with a bucket of rollover credits from the prior year, and then you add to that with your new admissions that you do in the current year, and ultimately get your total. So on a year-to-date basis, unfortunately, that kind of skews it, and it always makes you look better than you are earlier in the year. So that's why I encourage you, if you're gonna really dig into this, try to model it like I'm doing here and look at a full year picture. What do I think my annual full year revenue is going to be? And then my full year admissions. So if you do it, let's say you do it in this example in March, you've got the 153 credits in this example in March. You know what your monthly revenue has been. Try to roll forward your future credits, and I use 80% in this example, meaning 80% new to hospice are going to come in with their full credit. So basically, of the 23 admissions a month you're doing in May through September, you're really going to yield about 80% of those, whatever that turns out to be, about 19 a month in credits. It's not a one-to-one, because there's going to be some portion of your patients that aren't unique to you. They've been on a hospice before. So it's, you know, in the streamlined days, it was much easier to track, but I really think to get it, I've seen it happen time and time again when a hospice will look at these interim, you know, 4-month, 6-month measurements and get the wrong message, and then end up the year with a problem, and then ask, why did that happen? So I really encourage you to look at it a full year. If you're not a numbers person, try to enlist the help of someone who is, whether it's me or somebody else, but you really got to be looking at this more than just those interim measurements.
And I want to clarify, because, you know, when he says credits, like you start the year with credits from the prior year, those are negative credits. Those are negatives, people rolling over, beneficiaries that roll over from the prior year into the current year. It's not necessarily a negative, but it's not like you have a bunch of credits of unused CAP that roll with you. Is that right, Matthew?
Yeah, the credits are coming, but the patient revenue is rolling over as well. So it's not necessarily, it's not, as you say, a positive to your CAP. It's just the mechanics of how the numbers work.
Yeah, it's complicated at best. And just being frank, while you were off for just a moment, I told him, I said, guys, I don't do this. And this is why, being super transparent, because those of you that follow me know I tell all my stories, but I'm too old to go learn something new, y'all. So I was like, I don't want to learn how to do this and then train my staff. I just want to refer over to Matt. So that's been working well.
Yeah, well, before I did this on my own, I worked for a larger hospice company that had dozens of providers, and they had many with CAP problems, and they had a lot of trouble figuring out with a staff of accounting and finance people. So what I thought is, if these guys are struggling, how much more are the local independent operators struggling with this to even understand and comprehend it? And that's really why I went out on my own and started this, because it's just,
yeah, just doing this.
It needs the attention. Someone's got to give it the attention, and most of the time the hospice operators, they don't have time, or they don't know what to do. So
yeah, I do have another question. So you said discharging a patient is not an answer to the CAP problems. What about an admission decision? Should transfer patients or patients with greater than 2 benefit periods be admitted?
Yeah, so it goes back to the overall 80% benchmark I put out there. You don't have to have 100. All of your patients don't have to be in their first benefit period, but over the course of time, you want 80% or more to be that. So a few here or there on later benefit periods are okay, but it just can't be half. It's got to be balanced close to that 80%, or you're going to have trouble.
Okay. Are there any other questions? Thank you for holding in there and not feeling well. So Matthew, you're in Atlanta or outside Atlanta, right? Georgia?
Yes. Yep.
Do you guys have allergens and allergies over there?
It's a little early for that. There's no leaves out. I mean, I don't know. Yeah.
We've got,
it's a little early for allergy season.
I'm in Austin and we get cedar season real bad, and it's in full force right now. So I was sick over the weekend, just with the allergies that turn into the head cold, and I feel like today, but my people are used to me and my allergies. We've talked about it a lot. And this is my Florida office, y'all. I'm actually in Austin. I'm not getting to move to Florida just yet. I need a couple more years. So I took over another office in the building and made it my Florida office, and I'm making it beachy. And so I can pretend like I'm there. I'm not in my back office. Well, I appreciate this. I don't see any other questions. I did put a link to the Palmetto site in there. If you scroll to the bottom of that, it's got all the rules and instructions in pretty good layman's terms, but at the bottom are the actual forms that you can use to do your self-determined CAP reporting. And it's got the instructions, also tells you where to fax it in and all that good stuff. So I would use that link, but we'll follow up with an email tomorrow with the recording and everything. And then unless there's any other questions, we'll let you guys go. And again, Matthew, I really appreciate it. And look, I'll sell him a little more than he will sell himself. Whoops. He does this and he offers this as a service, monthly, quarterly basis. I don't know all the frequencies, but I would highly recommend, if you're even close, to really consider getting somebody to do this. And this is the only guy I know that does it. So we have a lot of mutual clients, and I actually had one asking me something. I said, well, I would refer you to CAP doctor. They said, well, that's who referred us to you. I'm like, oh yeah, I forgot. Sorry. So we refer back and forth quite a bit, I feel like. So, all right. Appreciate you guys. Have a great rest of your week, and look for a follow-up email coming out tomorrow. Thanks, Matthew.
Thank you.
Bye-bye.